This is it. This is the place where 10 black people were shot and killed on May 14th, 2022. All because of the color of their skin. Many white people had a question at that point: what is it like being black in Buffalo? So to answer that question, we had to come to Dr. Kush Bhardwaj. Dr. B, as he's affectionately known, is a former professor of African American studies at many different universities all across Western New York. But he left his post after the Tops mass shooting to continue his effort to do good at a nonprofit called Open Buffalo.
In my decade teaching at UB and winning 3 Milton Plesser Distinguished Teaching Awards, which I couldn't get in a shot, one of my Jedis, her name's Alexandra O'Peel. She literally, we ask deep questions and thoughts. And as you remember my TED Talk, asking generative questions, questions that generate other questions. In hip hop and social issues, my baby, race and gender ethics, RAGE, AAS 100 Intro to African American Studies, this girl, this crazy white girl, she was like a stenographer. She took every DQT, and deep question and thought, that we wrote down as a class together, cataloged them, and put them in a book. When my daughter was born, it's called For Anaya, and she even she even has a separate section for Anaya to put in deep questions herself. So I might make reference to this. Whether it makes the cut doesn't matter to me. It's just the idea of the shooting and all the good stuff that you do. It raises questions that raise more questions.
Yeah.
And maybe we can find answers as a community, but it's in raising the questions that we actually determine our trajectory. Just throwing that out there for context.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
So maybe we start by just a really easy one. If you just say your name and spell it for the record.
Dr. Kush K. Bhardwaj. Kush, K-U-S-H, middle initial K, last name Bhardwaj, B-H-A-R-D, the word hard is in my name, B-H-A-R-D-W-A-J. So that was, I would tell students, you can do it the easy way or the hard way. So
There you go. Okay, let's kind of focus on a very hyper-local moment. May 14th happens, and we're sitting across the street from it right now, the Tops on Jefferson Avenue. You weren't even here yet, though. You were still
in the college world.
And all of a sudden, something changed, Dr. B. You are no longer a professor, but an influencer. Why did you make that change?
Well, in the same way when 9/11 happened, Ed, many of our countrymen and women enlisted in the military. They felt that calling. Around these parts, some of the black community called Black 9/11. And I felt that same call to action. And I was pulled back, not just to Buffalo, but the East Side. And that goes back to my days as a founding charter school teacher. So.
And dig into that a little bit. I mean, the pull to leave a field that is lucrative, that is influential for young minds, to then come to a nonprofit and influence a community, influence change. Talk to me about that pull, that magnetism.
In 2003, there was a charter school in the Central Park Plaza. It was the Knowledge is Power program. KIPP was the acronym. It was KIPP Sankofa. And Sankofa is a Ghanaian term meaning return to the source and fetch, symbolized by a bird turning on its self with an egg in its mouth, and the egg represents the forthcoming generation. That school was transformative. My young students, my 10-year-old kids, went to school from 7 to 5 every other Saturday and 3 weeks in the summer. 10-year-old kid going to school 10 hours a day. And my wonderful school leader, a brilliant black woman named Uchenna, she empowered me to teach the kids right. And I literally had them standing at their desks in ready stances, like martial artists. And I would start every class, they'd be on their feet. I'd say, "Kippsters on your feet." And I'd say, "Africans are." They say, "Not slaves." And I say, "Slavery is a condition put upon African people. Kippsters, take your seats," and we'd begin a lesson. It was at KIPP Sankofa that I had a wonderful young lady. Her name was Candace, still is. And she said to me, "Mr. B," I wasn't Dr. B yet, "Mr. B, my daddy's coming home." You know what that means, Ed?
He's coming home from jail.
Correct. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of male figures in the school. We had a black male art teacher and a man, Mr. Sully, very few men in the building, and I didn't have a lot of dads in the building, so I was a father figure to many of the kids in the building. But there was this one that Candace's dad, his name is James Young, and he turned out to be one of my favorite KIPP dads. It was his mother, Pearl Young, that was one of the 10 victims shot and killed at TOPS. So I'm proud to say that I went to Candace's grandmother and James' mom's funeral. And I went and I hugged my 10-year-old, who's now 29-year-old grown woman, and we cried in each other's arms. And my entire academic career has always been learning and teaching about race, racism, black culture, black history, African culture, African history, going to Ghana and actually being in the slave dungeons. One of the pivotal moments for me was when I was in the actual slave dungeons in Ghana during my first trip. I went there twice. I touched the walls of the slave dungeons, and it was so suffocating, dark. The size of the ventilation was no bigger than this area, about 2 hands. And when you touch the rock, you're not kidding yourself. Your eyes aren't playing tricks. You could almost see the human matter etched into the bone, blood and bones etched into the stone of the wall. And while touching those walls, I would hear many of the African Americans on the study tour, the black Americans, were having a beyond visceral reaction to it. We're talking screams of terror, blood-curdling screams. So much that the Ghanaians, the native Ghanaians, were looking at the black Americans and kind of like, whoa, figuring it out, like how traumatic it was for them. Much like I would imagine a Jewish person going to Auschwitz and seeing what your ancestors literally went through. Touching those walls and hearing the screams of my black brothers and sisters, I was just so fortunate and privileged to be Kush Bhardwaj. Your name is your cultural compass. My last name oriented me to a land, a history, a people, a culture. And when you think of that being taken, stripped from African Americans, their name, their religion, their culture, their God, all of this being turned inside out, it located me on this crazy spectrum of race. I'm not a white man. I'm a brown man, but I'm not a black man. And the treatment that black men and women get in this society is something I've always studied and taught about. And after making many colleges very, very rich in admissions and not just teaching, I'm very proud of the work I did, earning 3 Milton Plesser Distinguished Teaching Awards from the largest institution in the state, being named the top African American Studies professor in the nation by the anonymous student website, ratemyprofessor.com. But almost like someone who studied nursing their whole life and then they get out to be an actual field nurse, I was happy to make the jump and take everything that I've been learning and doing and to leave academia and go on the front lines. And now with this piloted Race, Power, and Privilege program, teaching anti-racism in training and assessments for nonprofits, for corporations, for all kinds of agencies. That's my calling now, and not just helping the community on the grassroots, but helping institutions think about how they've been trained to think. Because how you think and perceive people reflects on how you treat them. And much love to all the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion employees and activists out there. But many companies, many agencies and organizations are just checking a box, and we're not going deeper, doing the deep dive and the type of thing that we saw May 14th.
So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Here we are 8 months since the shooting. What have you learned and realized since, having now been on the front lines of this community?
Things that I've been teaching and studying about for years have been revealed to be true, which is the devaluation of black life is something that we see time and time again. When thousands of Rwandans are killed in 1994, mostly by machete, doesn't make the front page. Regrettably, after the massacre on 5/14, the Uvalde shooting happened, and it's almost like a bright light was on Buffalo, the east side of Buffalo, and we're fading into memory, and we're being forgotten about. Purposeful neglect comes to mind. And it's not just about investment in the east side and in Black Buffalo, it's about the divestment. And I've been able to see with my own eyes who's here and who's not.
So walk me through that. Who is here? Who is not here?
Well, a lot of work and discussion has been on the food desert and the lack of a mainstream grocery store. It took a while for Tops to open up again, and the community is not, it's not monolithic. When I was still working at a college, the day that Tops opened up again, it was in my spirit to come and immediately patronize it. You know what I mean? And
I did the same thing.
I was hoping, I don't know, Ed, I was hoping there was going to be lines outside where they had to hire and there was a boom. It didn't happen. Prior to it even opening, I was hoping that Wegmans or Aldi's or you name that grocery store that would come in and step in. But I was able to see that it was not considered cost effective by various entities. It's very clear who you want to do business with and who you don't want to do business with.
So I kind of want to cut to the chase in what you're saying. Are you saying that these companies are not interested in working or having black people patronize their stores?
It's not about black or white, it's about green. And the fact is, if they don't view a certain community, like the black community, to be as profitable and lucrative as, say, East Amherst or Clarence or Orchard Park or East Aurora, it wouldn't be in their best interest to set up. You can't literally say, like, we don't want black money, unless it goes back to the Cynthia Wiggins case where Johnny Cochran was brought in. Are you familiar with that case?
No.
Big shout out to Bob Perk, one of the finest lawyers in Buffalo. Bob Perk, a Buffalo lawyer, brought Johnny Cochran to Buffalo because there was a young lady named Cynthia Wiggins who was a young teen mom. She had a son. She was working in the food court in the Galleria. And the buses from the black community did not go straight up to the entrances of the Galleria. Meanwhile, buses from Canada, buses from white neighborhoods were being brought right up. So this young lady had to cross 8 lanes of traffic, and she was struck and killed by a huge truck. And even though her son won a settlement, they won a settlement, the young boy lost his mom. But we can't just speculate. The magnificent attorney, Bob Perk, who's a great friend of mine, he used to come into my UB lectures and lecture about it, and he brought what we could consider the smoking gun. I still have a copy of it. And that is an NFTA memo that literally talked about not wanting buses to go there. That's how they won the case. That was literally it. So what is the point I'm making, Ed? Racism is not just about language. It's about access. It's about where do you want them to go? Where do you want them to be? Are they welcome? Are they accepted? And whether it's, in this particular case, black Americans, go anywhere in the country. Jewish Americans, gay Americans, Latinos, immigrants. Who we open our doors to and actually welcome rather than just let in. That's part of the challenge in American society right now.
It's interesting that you say that because when I was talking to Celestine Cheney's son, he mentioned so much of that. A lack of opportunity, a lack of education, a lack of privilege that white people so often have and see other white people in that, you know. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, if your employer has an opening, you bring in another white person. That generational wealth in white families is prevalent. None of that exists in many black families.
Comparatively, absolutely.
So how do we change that? And is there a perception problem, or is it a reality problem?
Perception can be reality, but
Right.
the reality of not having, instead of, my director, Fran Shell Parker, says it well, instead of privilege, let us think of it as unearned social benefits. And the idea of transmitted generational wealth. The concept of redlining, where loans were not made available to black people and literally stopped black people from owning homes, therefore stopping and preventing the transmission of generational wealth. That's where you can go, where you can get educated. If, you know, in my years teaching in colleges, I always had like a Professor B before my doctorate even, inquisition, where I asked your name, major, final career goal, where were you born, where did you grow up? I want to know, did you go to a school that had a number on it? Did you go to a school that had...
PS 189.
Did you go to a school that the books were older than the teachers?
Right.
And it's ironic because I did a lot of work in admissions in Buffalo, and these are, again, socio-cultural, socioeconomic factors. Did you go to a school like the Say Yes scholarships? I would ask students, and we did some great works with many of the colleges in Buffalo, if they went to a school that had metal detectors in them, or teen pregnancy, like, did you or anyone you know get pregnant in high school? Don't have to be about you, but anyone you know. Have you or has someone you known ever been or is currently in jail? And have you or someone you know smoked that Kush, marijuana, any drug addictions? Do you know anyone who's been, and this was way before 514, anyone who's been the victim of gun violence in Buffalo? The number of kids that I worked with, high school juniors and seniors trying to enter college, you're seeing a disproportionate amount of sociological stress factors. So that speaks to privilege. And again, one of the major privileges is not being taught your story.
In terms of what? What do you mean by that?
We don't learn where black people came from, how they got here, what happened to them once they got here, and there's no spiraling of history to understand. Look at it in terms of continuous benefits or continuous detriments. I'm not saying all white people owned slaves. That's historically couldn't be more inaccurate. But lighter skin did have social benefits that went with it. So in the founding of this country, on one side you have landowners, law owners who owned slaves, who created the laws, and then on the other hand you have enslaved Africans who were taken from their motherland, owned as property, subsequently freed, only be discriminated against for decades and centuries more, then to be Jim Crowed and lynched and all this stuff, and then finally Voting Rights Act, and it's a game of catch up. If you tie education to power, you can see how this game of catch up has not been fair.
And Dr. B, we're still catching up. I mean, this is 2022. We're going to be in 2023 by the time this comes out. But the fact that we are still having to literally catch up. I mean, it feels like we're in this wheel that seems to have no end.
One author, Sean King, said, "Oh, the system isn't broke, it's working exactly as it's supposed to. The system is designed to replicate class structures." Meaning, W.E.B. Du Bois once said, the greatest black intellectual in history, first black man to graduate with a PhD from Harvard. Education by its very definition should challenge class structures, not replicate them. One of my other mentors at UB, Dr. Shuja, who took me to Ghana on my first trip, he had a book called he talked about the difference between education versus schooling. We have a lot of people schooled, but we don't talk about class. We barely talk about race. But to understand that being poor matters just as much as the color of your skin in certain realms is very, very important, because poor kids have a lot more in common than people want to talk about. So if, God forbid, there was a shooting in a poor white neighborhood by someone of a different race, if it's a poor area, those same problems would present themselves. But when race mixes with class, you have an extra special intersectionality of oppressions. And we don't discuss them, we don't teach about them, and basically it's designed to keep power in the hands of few while we are at each other's throats rather than at each other's sides.
I'm so glad you hit on this, because Wayne was saying this exact same thing.
Shout out to Wayne.
And you know what he said yesterday was that he grew up poor. His mom was single. The lights were off, they used candles. The power was off, the heat was off, they all gathered in one room. But it was some of the happiest times that they had, and they figured it out. And they beat that adversity. He pulled himself out of whatever that poverty was to better his life and to better his children's lives. But when you talk to others, it's like that's the anomaly. Why is that the case?
Because there's money in poverty. Keeping poor people poor is an industry. Enslaving in the new form known as incarceration is an industry. From 1972, and where Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs, in the last 30 years, the state and federal prison population has increased by 800%, Ed. 800%. And who are they filling with those jails? The uneducated and the undereducated, the unemployed and the underemployed. And again, where race and class meet, you find disproportionate sentencing for Black Americans. The Rockefeller drug laws, in which there was a difference in sentencing for powder versus crack cocaine. Look at how many people are being freed since marijuana has been made legal. There's been the purposeful destruction of the Black family through these practices and through this system, the education system, the prison to school, the school to prison pipeline. Urban education has been problematic. You name the president. You go back from Bush to Carter to Reagan, you can go back, and the certain areas have had the same problems consistently. South Bronx, East Buffalo. That's because the system that is designed to think about it in terms of encouragement versus discouragement. This system that we're in disproportionately discourages young people of color from pursuing an education, from going to college. There's a whole industry about helping, think of all these euphemisms, underserved, underskilled, at risk, poor Black kids in particular. And the irony is, you can get scholarships and things of that nature, but if they're coming from a school that underserved and underprepared them, many, not all, but many first generation students, there's a lot riding on their shoulders. How would you like to, hey mom, I got to this so-and-so college, and then you failed out, and now you got a private school college bill coming to your house. So
how do we fix this, and where do we make that change? Because here we are 8 months after the shooting, we keep talking about what needs to change, but how do we make these changes?
Okay, first, education. We are not talking about what people have gone through. And learning about race and the history of racism is not an exercise in naming, blaming, and shaming and guilting out white people. I would not have been as successful in education if I had alienated white kids. Matter of fact, I don't think I ever had a white student at any college level complain about.
Well, isn't it about bringing people together?
It is, but the irony, Ed, is a degree in African American studies is not considered as lucrative as a business or an engineering degree. I hate to tell you this, but I've had black students in my decades of teaching whose own parents gave them crap about why are you taking this? You know, questioning what an education is for. Is it supposed to give you your receipt or diploma so that you can get a job, or is it supposed to make you a better, well-rounded person who's around people unlike them? Mm-hmm. There's actually, in 2000, there was a Time magazine article which talked about the photographic history of lynching in America. We live in a country where lynching was so prevalent, and we're talking about municipal sadistic events where people would get together and string up a black man or woman or others and hang them, take their ears, nose, and genitals as trophies. And people were taking pictures of this. What would make you so sick that you would not only lynch somebody, not only stick corkscrews in their skin to see what it does, but to take pictures of it? And then what, Ed? To actually put it in postcards. Until 1831, I believe, the U.S. Postmaster General had to literally prohibit the sending of lynching photographs in the mail.
I mean, that's the basis of this country.
We have to come face to face with the basis of our country. And this race, power, and privilege anti-racist training that we do, we talk about genocide, the wiping out of Native Americans, and enslavement, the stealing of black people for labor, and the creation of race. And understanding that, again, poor white people have a lot more in common with poor black people than the education system lets them know. You know what I mean? So the idea of how did race as a concept come about and how do we combat it? By being able to look at things like this. I mean, there's one picture of a person who's literally being held across a bonfire. And literally, people are in this picture. Now, if this is too hard to look at, then how can we talk about it? This one's very powerful. Thank you. This one's very powerful. This black man is being held by a rope, strangled to death. And look at this young girl's face.
And that's a young girl. I mean, this is, what year was this from?
Sometime in the 1800s.
But still today.
Oh, I'm sorry, that would be 1935. My mistake. 1935, that's not far away from here at all.
Some grandparents.
So you were saying?
So here we are in 2022, and realistically, that girl could be the shooter who came to town on May 14th.
Hate is taught. Hate is not a learned behavior. If you take a black baby and a white baby and put them together, they'll grow up and they'll say, oh, your hair is different than mine. Oh, your hair's skinny, your lips are different than mine. But it's how we perceive these differences that either make us sick human beings or healthy human beings. And by not discussing slavery, genocide, lynching, and not talking about class, about who it empowered, you know what I mean? Please understand that slavery gave black people a false sense of inferiority and white people a false sense of superiority. But at the end of the day, if you can't feed your kids, you can't educate your kids, and you're white, what do you have? You just feel better because you're not black? The temptation...
How dumb is that?
Howard Zinn, the eminent historian, he cited that as one of the most important factors that helped to ensnare black people in this complex web of historical threads of slavery. The temptation of superior status for poor white people, the frenzy for profit with capitalistic agriculture. We're talking tobacco, cotton, we're talking major crops that had to be farmed. Native Americans, they tried to use them, but they knew the land. They knew the land too well, so they could run off. And white people, genetically, with melanin, were not as well suited. It's a physiological concept of melanin. And again, this special helplessness of the displaced African allowed them to get ensnared in this complex web. But this web of slavery and just the class system that we're in, where so few own so much of the wealth, it's created a system that we purposely have put into place and that we actually make sure is strengthened by the education system as we know it. Because
You need a degree to get a job. In some cases.
In some cases, but questioning the notion of education itself, Ed, that's necessary. Not just are you getting a degree to get a job, but how are you learning about other people? I can't say it enough. How you think about others determines how you treat others. And this concept of differential humanity, whether black, Jewish, gay, Latino, Mexican, any LGBTQ, like there's so many, like people start to turn off other people's notions of humanity based on some characteristic that they don't agree with. We live in a country where Columbus, a genocidal slave trader, is worshipped and has stuff named after him. Columbus, Ohio, Columbia. Meanwhile, the great John Brown has been deleted from our memory. You familiar with John Brown?
Of course. Most
people will never learn about John Brown, a radical abolitionist. That's an interesting concept, who not only wanted to free black people, but put, in 1856 in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, not only free black folk, but put guns in the hands of slaves and set off waves of slave revolts. That's class. That's consciousness. You know what they call John Brown in history? You know what his biggest adjective is?
Tell us.
Crazy. So that's what you are if you're white and you care about black suffering. That's what the historical record tells us. And the media doesn't do that great of a job either. And just being able to understand what is happening in certain communities and getting a real view of it and understanding what causes it and what continues it, and then being able to make the decision, do I care?
And I think that's why we're having these conversations, because I'll be totally upfront with you. The shooting changed me sincerely. Standing outside that supermarket, and I don't want to make this about me, but I feel like it has changed me and put me on a mission, on a course to really educate not only the community, but myself. Because there are so many things that I, Jewish, gay, and white, don't understand and don't know. Because I grew up in a family that had two parents. I grew up in a family that lived in an affluent community. I went to a school that got a great education, went to college, got a job, but so many other people aren't able to have that opportunity. And it's not that I feel guilty. It's that I'm interested in learning and helping to spark a change. And I feel like that's where we need to go as a community right now.
You are our journalistic John Brown. You can't wash off the feeling you had when you were here.
It was awful.
And it stayed with you. And the community, I told you about the day I saw you on the ground. I saw you literally on the street the whole time. You wouldn't leave. But going back to this lynching that I just showed you, the massacre at 514 penetrated the marrow of the black community here in Buffalo.
Right.
And whether brown, white, gay, straight, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jew, black, wherever you are on it, to not recognize someone else's suffering is to lose your own humanity. And we have to think about how it's not just a maniac driving 4 hours to massacre our elders. It is a CEO who doesn't want anybody of color hired. It's bigotry, it's this, it's that. We have to connect those tissues. So when it comes down to it, good people need to stay together. And this notion Channel 7 has of Buffalo Strong, it's being challenged. Am I saying the phrase right? Is it Buffalo Strong?
It could be any city strong.
Stronger together, Buffalo. What's our catchphrase?
Buffalo Strong, yeah.
We need to interrogate that. The same way that you are interrogating what privileges and what things went well for you in your life and understanding why it didn't go a certain way for other communities or people, we need to interrogate this notion of Buffalo Strong. In my work here at Open Buffalo, with the Race, Power, and Privilege program, being able to talk to different organizations and agencies and profits and nonprofits in East Aurora, in Orchard Park. I've heard from our own citizens, like Dr. B, it feels like a whole nother world. We need to bridge these worlds. And it's not just about wearing a bracelet and thinking about them. It's about investing in this community and being here. You know what I mean? And putting it's three things. It's understanding, it's language, and it's action. Understanding what's going on, being able to communicate in the language that respects the people there, that other people will understand, so you can mobilize action. Having people come. Here at Open Buffalo, we do diaper club. We have diapers for the community, thousands, I can't even count. The director of community engagement, Davone Patterson, former UB student of mine, MAC champion, thrower. Big shout out to Coach Garnham, legend. He does pop-up grills with hot dogs and hamburgers, and he's taken out hundreds of thousands of bags of groceries. He's out right now doing a toy drive. This notion of Buffalo Strong, and since you know better, do you want to do better? I have such love for our city and the Bills Mafia. When we get mobilized and interested, we wind up just putting all our money together, $5 here and there, and next thing you know, some opponent's mother's foundation in Ohio has like $72,000 or something like that. Understanding the need that is here, and particularly the east side of Buffalo. Investing in ourselves matters.
I just want to challenge you a little bit on that, because some people will say, well, you know what, Dr. B, we donated to the 514 fund, and we donated to this fund after the shooting. But I feel like what you're going to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but because we've had this conversation before, what I feel like you're going to say is the line to give should be longer than the line to receive.
You must have heard me speak before. Absolutely. When we have our families coming for the diaper club, for example, the line goes around the corner and so on and so forth. But agencies, organizations, businesses, and companies that can provide the resources. I don't care I don't have to name names of companies, but like there should be all sorts of home centers that sell like home goods fighting to give grills to donate to organizations like Open Buffalo so they can do more stuff. Diapers until the walls explode, just all kinds of resources. We find money for what we care about in society. Bombs or books, prisons or schools. Putting our money where our heart is, that's going to redefine Buffalo Strong. And it's not just about money. It's also about presence. And I don't mean present like Santa Claus. People coming down here and being here. My first month when I worked here, my friend John, who worked here with us, big shout out to John Vines, he goes, Dr. B, is that a tour bus? There was an actual tour bus. Like it's a tourist destination coming by. And it's one thing to pay your respects and to see it and all that stuff, but to think of how you can cause change and how you can help. I think that there's a difference between thinking something is bad, saying something is bad, and actually doing something about something that you think is bad. And it's not just about stopping bad things, it's about doing good. And I have enough faith in Buffalo and all of its versions of our city, but we need everyone who loves the Bills, for example, to not forget about East Buffalo the way it's going. And it's been 5 months. It's going to be another 5 months till the year anniversary. And the need is stronger than ever. But again, the community's still healing. And there's people, I'll tell you, when the Tops reopened, you and I, not together, but we think alike, we went and ran there to patronize that Tops and hope to see a line of people outside. When I left that first day that they opened, I pulled out, and just as I pulled out, coming up this side of Jefferson, was a big group of people protesting that it opened.
Right.
So there's people, we have to listen to varied voices. Black people are not one monolithic group. Not everyone thinks the same, acts the same. There's people who don't believe that the ancestors have been honored the right way. It's a tough situation. Almost sometimes you wonder if you can win, because if Tops wasn't open, we'd still have the food desert problem that we do. And there's been cases, and my executive director, where free diapers and free resources were taken by some store owners and they tried to resell them in their own stores. Can't make that up. So donating and making sure your donations go to the right place is the tricky thing. Whether it was Hurricane Katrina, the Red Cross, or anything, we have to make sure your actual donations get to where they need to go. And the best way to do that is to come down yourself and do it yourself. Every time I'm at any sort of grocery store, would you like to round up to give to this and this? And I say to the cashier, I do all my charity work personally. And they look at me like I got 5 eyebrows, but what do you
I mean, you could just say no thank you, but you're right.
Don't embezzle what I'm trying to get to the people who need it. And if at best, let me go myself. But that touches on, again, Ed, the fear of black people and the fear of the black community.
Yeah.
And when Juneteenth happened last year, May 14th, that's literally a month after. I heard people say to me that they don't think that it's safe to go to Juneteenth this year, that they're afraid of another shooting. We don't do that with the Italian Fest. We don't do that with a Taste of Buffalo. There's festivals. I hope Juneteenth comes back again, stronger than ever, bigger than ever. Open Buffalo is going to be at Juneteenth. We want to march in Juneteenth. It's one thing to have a table, but people from all over Buffalo need to know that they are wanted and they are loved. And Black Buffalo needs to know that they are wanted and they are loved.
Giving a seat at the table.
And giving a voice. Black people, nobody wants to talk about black suffering unless black people are hurting themselves. That's one thing I've learned in decades as a higher education professional. When you talk about black on black crime, what about Chicago and all that? But if it's police brutality and other factors and something as horrific as May 14th, that is white supremacy and hate crimes in its purest form. And the man live streamed the murders. This community does not just need to heal, but it needs to see investment, not divestment. And organizations like Open Buffalo care about racial, economic, and ecological justice. Having water we can drink, being able to have grass that you can actually play on. And I'm really excited about organizations like Open Buffalo and the on the ground, boots on the ground work that they're doing. And there's a lot of great people of varied ethnicities. Dare I say the phrase, good white people. Problem with slavery was, and as I taught about this for decades, there were good white people during slavery. Problem is, they didn't stop the bad white people. And that same challenge exists today. Good white people really need to step up and shut down what the bad ones are doing because they're very vocal. They're vocal, they vote, they arm themselves, they actually drive to locations and actually do recon before shooting up the neighborhood. And that's just one form of it. So we need to understand racism in all its forms. We need to understand institutional racism. We need to understand white supremacy. And you don't have to be of a group to support a group. My favorite t-shirt of all time, I may be straight, but I don't hate. I go to the pride parades, you know what I mean? To denounce anti-Semitism, even if you're not Jewish. All these forms of bigotry, they're all connected. But for some reason, Black America still finds itself at the bottom of the total poll as far as their lives mattering as much, to the point where we politicize the phrase Black Lives Matter. Do Black lives in Buffalo matter? This next 5 months is going to tell us, because we already saw the last 5 months, and we're fading from memory right now.
I feel like that's a good place to leave it.
Hope. I'd like to thank you, Ed, for continuing to do the work that you do and ask the questions, and don't be afraid to go into communities and learn. I'll tell you something. When the KIPP Sankofa Charter School was opened, we had to do home visits, because if you're going to have a kid come to school from 7 to 5, like the parents had to sign a literal commitment to excellence, and where they had to sign the kids' homework every day. White teachers being afraid to go into the communities and knock on the doors of the schools they teach. That's deep. You know what I mean? Walking down the street of Jefferson, Utica, and all this stuff. But, on another point as well, the notion of gun violence in Buffalo. We as people of color, we shake with horror when the white man comes and kills us in our grocery store. But gun violence, I was praying that it would go down, and we're still killing each other in the city of Buffalo. Getting to think about how we don't love ourselves as people of color is and people, period, is very important. So poverty, ignorance, illiteracy, drug addiction, incarceration, these are all things, the social surgeons that we are, that we work to, and the Emerging Leaders Program here at Open Buffalo, and training our youth and youth action, all the various ways that Open Buffalo does work, it helps to, as you asked about, do something, to be part of a solution. But systemic change requires more than just a couple of people. It requires a chain of people to set a revolution in motion.
You're amazing.
I try. The fact is, it's not your fault for not asking. It's not your fault for not knowing. It's your fault for not asking. And whether you're a student or a journalist or a mom, asking the questions that make your kid better than you were is what it is. And you would think racism would have gone down and tolerance would go up, but it's like the pendulum has swung.
Yeah.
After the first black president, my God, bigotry has come out guns blazing, literally. And
To our own community here.
exactly. So thank you again
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Appreciate you. You're
Appreciate
amazing.
you,
You're the
man.
best. I'm good. Are you guys good? Okay.